Hello, I'm Prageeta Sharma, and I'm here at the Woodbury Poetry Room, October 10th, 2024. I'm really thrilled to be here, and what I thought I would do is just tell you a little bit about this new manuscript of poetry that I'm working on and how it relates to this wonderful anthology on thinking about feminist influence and poetics. A personal note which brought me to this new book is, well, actually, the title of this book is called One Mint One, and it's from the series of paintings by Barnett Newman, the One Mint series, and particularly his painting One Mint Number One. I was struck by lots that went into the concept of the painting. It's both its abstract expressionist gesture and its conceptual means. And so I named my new manuscript One Mint and then W-O-N, so One Mint One. But it didn't actually win, and that is sort of what the poetry manuscript is about. I was wrestling with the loss of my first husband and my identity as a widow. And then throughout the last several years, 8 or 9 years, my second husband, also widowed, got sick with an aggressive cancer, different cancer than my first husband, but led me to being widowed twice in under 10 years. My second husband just passed in November. And so this manuscript, while it began as a healing process where Mike, my second husband, and I would find a Barnett Newman painting in lots of museums where we traveled, and I always sort of found it a healing beacon where we would stand in front of this painting and think about it. But after his diagnosis, I started to think more about my secular relationship to oneness, one mint, and Hinduism. And I started to move away from it because of its ideas of purity. And also because the ideas of purity, also something I don't talk about too much in the collection, but will later, is the notion of purity and widowhood. Somehow my dual identity makes me cursed in relation to Hinduism, or I have to just be overzealous about ritual. And what I found is I became underzealous about ritual and started to really critique ideas of what seemed too rigid. And I started to look for poetics and examine ideas of rigidity and positionality away from purity. So I know that's a lot of talking, but it actually relates to thinking about Dalit poetics and the problem of purity, obviously, for the caste system, which is what Hinduism becomes so, even when it kind of denies that position, becomes so immersed in it in relation to purity. So I often talk about neutrality with language, and a larger conversation I want to have about neutrality and language is thinking about the lyric versus the didactic. So I started to explore poems that examined more of didactic work, not always, but a few. And I'd often get criticism from people like, oh, that was really a straightforward poem, and I started to think about our rich history in American poetry of didactic work and protest, and the way Dalit meant much of what's happening in some contemporary Dalit poetry is inspired and is speaking with African American poetics, ideas of protest, and refusing a generality or a lyric grace that happens in Sanskrit scriptures. So I'm really keen on thinking about how does that influence me as as an American-born South Asian poet, and do I owe my community? So I'm going to just read a few poems from this new manuscript, 1 Mint 1. Abstract expressionist. What is the textual equivalent of a visual work? What feeling matches how to speak about suffering, art, and politics when we live in vile times? What is repelling me about building a bucolic, representational image? Abstraction helps me think about concrete things. Can I write that I am an abstruse definition that might be justified in art, in poetry, in music, but not in my human symbolism? In my waking life, I feel indistinguishable from all the hypothetical explanations laid bare before us. The earth is dying. People are lost in extreme rhetorical defenses. The right wing is violent, amoral, and busting at their GOP seams. Lone men wage war and shoot up communities, and I don't absolve them by calling them lone. The Bharatiya Janata Party, the ruling political party, are committing violence in the name of scarcity. We're still in the partition land of 80 years ago, Hindus against Muslims, committing violence against castes. What can privileged castes do outside of their ideas of commerce, and when does religion serve to buffer such rigidity? How can I continue to bind myself to theories, to blocking virulence in a liberal bubble? And yet I want the philosophical interpretations postulating unreal language, complex phrases, deep remarks, ideal statements, to buttress the indefinite terms, writing in a concrete voice full of recondite words. What can happen in an ample, transcendent announcement with corresponding arguments encased in vagueness? If I were in video, what would the true definition be of my personal prominence? Will this presence give me tools to bludgeon with discourse? Can I flee to the poetry world with my satchel of words? Will it be transcendent to just connect our minds and bodies and hope for the best? Is this a Vedic treaty? Did it try to solve labor but didn't understand? It introduced hierarchy, a world full of imperishable paint markings, lines of personal goodwill and atrocity. What does our tremulous heart build if numbers can speak collectively to this violence? I don't want to retreat into art. I want poetry and art to revitalize my energy to confront this unprecedented 20th century life of the Capitalocene as it's erasing us now in mileage deep into the 21st century. I just question what started with the Industrial Revolution and the move from tribal to mercantile again and again and again. It is abstracted and then real. Metaphorically charged. I meant well and resisted comparisons for a while because those who might cajole me into finding their inaccuracy accurate need likenesses. I was meant to find myself inside a metaphor, but I wasn't there and felt disillusioned. Instead, I built the word with the bricks of what comparison might mean with another suffix. What I meant was I was keen to add nouns. I wanted to add wound to the comparison and build its condition to be matter of fact. I found the condition of the wound to be built into its state of cruelty. She said they have wounds too, and that's why they feel this way. I said, I'm not trying to wound them, but they like thinking of my wounds in a certain way. I find their wounds to affect cruelty, and mine did not intend the same effect. I'm angry at those who've been economical about what I might have meant. I'm despairing because I created meaning from a grievance nobody dared to own. They wanted to possess the grievance after it was vetted, and I didn't want to give it to them. So they lied about what they thought of comparisons, which are metaphors lying about what they said they mean. That's more where I'm thinking about race and gender and language. So I'm also trying to figure out how can we think about discourse and vagueness and talk about wounds, I guess. I have a few lines from Laura Riding Jackson from the poem The Telling. And this title of this poem is A Memory of Its Ceasing, but I'll begin with these lines from Laura Riding Jackson. The memory we have in us of a time before physical time is the memory of the end, our memory of utter soul being, possessed through the body's witness to what has occurred, is a memory of its ceasing. So I'll begin the poem, A Memory of Its Ceasing. I grew up in an old shamble house, now overbuilt, decorative for several decades, but now with a slightly gangly tarnish of neglect. It's still full of Hindu and Christian idols and celebrities, Swami Ramakrishna, Sai Baba, and Jesus Christ. The idols still sit with and without purpose as officers, relics, and spiritual registers. I find I am now freely espousing, but also finding these marks of idolatry in poetry. And so this is about coming back to a normalized moment with a steep and yet numbered center, one that does not grouse at bitter states, not in the hot room of hibernated troubles. This is the one about when consciousness becomes exciting, or about developing a feeling of benevolence towards a meager process. This is about loving what is ordinary and its sentient one-ment, about loving a slow drain that drowns the enormity with oneself and the localized system of numbering my thumbs. This is about finding all the freighted blankets and figuring out that the itchy pain returns in syntactical tatters. It's about earning a kind of uninhibited hurting and finding that it is not an unfathomable creed without a lesson. It is about the eye that does the choosing of memories for a truer vision, in seeing what might be down the vituperative road and freeing this vision from its shame. What kind of people are down the road for me? Who sees me in kindness? Who do I see back in kindness? I've tried to leave some coldness in the carols behind in search for a new library desk. This is about human consciousness, personality, and the abstract scripture I might try to induce. But there's loss. I'm losing my mother, who taught me that Hinduism has ethics in love and friendship, even when she has been coarse about all of it. I too have been coarse, and thus lost meaningless friends, for which only I am weighted down in bouts of sadness. But to free it from pages, from falsities, how spacious. This is about coming back to oneself. No Ram Dass, no be here now, no Om of sitting in place. This is about sighs and succumbing. What is sovereignty for the Hindu today? The self in Hindu thought, even in the individual, is a synonym for the universal, and that's from Bipin Chandra Pal. What is the sovereignty? I'm going to start over. What is sovereignty for the Hindu today? What is universal now but a hierarchy, in that it still develops too much consensus around its power? What is the reprise of colonial Hinduism with so much of the self? How do we take up space and place? How did this all become the New Age? Where is the self here in Southern California, where we have erased the communities with our settling universal selves? Is it the universal that keeps people out? What is a self in Hindu thought? Who is myself in Hindu thought? And what is mystic about this? What is the reprise of the individual who is a synonym of the self? Maybe the power of Shakti can be the new synonym, with its sense of to be able. But is the problem of being able also a caste privilege mentality? And is this still reigning in the institution of the self? Why then do we build such an assemblage around it as a ritual, but not check into what might be too self-determined?